Well, hello there, and welcome back to Abby the Podcast Lady. This is the monthly case study episode where I break down a podcast that I've been listening to, and I share what I think is great about it and what could use some improvement, and most importantly, what you can take from this show and apply to your own show. Today's case study is going to be on the show Homeschool History. It's a BBC Radio 4 podcast that was hosted by Greg Jenner. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he's a public historian. He's best known for Horrible Histories and You're Dead to Me. And Homeschool History is just a fun, fast-paced, action-packed, family-friendly series that brings historical moments to life with sound effects and storytelling, and there's just plenty of humor in it. And I actually found it on TikTok only a couple of weeks ago, and I've just been absolutely sucked into it ever since. Someone was talking about it, and I just Googled it up, hit play, and I've been listening ever since. Unfortunately, the last episode was published 4 years ago in March of 2021, but we're going to get more into that coming up here in a little bit. So a little background on what this show is. It started during the pandemic, right around the time when kids were stuck at home, parents were scrambling for educational content and resources, and schools were trying to figure out how to do remote learning and e-learning and all that stuff. So this show really was a brilliant concept at the right time. It was just fun, short history lessons that were family friendly. They lined up very loosely with like what homeschool curriculum would look like for an elementary school student, but it didn't feel like school. It felt like storytelling and watching something on TV or listening to an immersive audiobook experience. Episodes covered everything from Pocahontas to the space race to Pompeii to William Shakespeare. Like, it covered a really wide range of topics, and every single one of them wrapped up with a little pop quiz. So you could kind of play along with it at the end. It kind of had that game show element, which I really, really enjoyed. So as I mentioned, the show only ran until March of 2021, but I think it's still something that's really worth talking about and exploring, especially since people like me are still discovering it and listening to it. So I want to kind of break down why it is still relevant to this day and what you can take away from this show. Let's start with what works well about homeschool history. There's a lot of things that this show did really, really well, and honestly still does really, really well. They're just not making new episodes. The very first thing I want to point out about what this show did so well was that they clearly knew their audience. They knew exactly who the show was for. There was no denying it was meant for families and kids. Everything about the tone of the show, from the goofy sound effects to the silly jokes, it was designed to really suck the kids in, but also be entertaining for parents and be something that the parents want to turn on and want to listen to. And everyone in the family, in the car, in the home, wherever they were at listening to it, stayed really captivated with the show. It literally was a just brilliant, brilliant case study in if you're making a show for a specific audience, you really can cater to them and they're going to love it. Another thing that this show did really well was their use of sound design. So sound effects in the show were super great. They were playful, and they just really helped paint the scene of what they were talking about. So like in the space race one, they were doing rocket noises and things like that, where it just brought you into the moment and it felt like you were part of this world of the history that you were learning about in the process. And it didn't overdo it either, because I have heard things where it's like, oh, really, it's an excessive amount of sound effects. You start sounding like a one-man band trying to play every instrument at once. And this show just did a really good job of balancing the sound design to be something that wasn't too obnoxious or too much for the parents, but kept the kids really engaged and captivated. Another thing this show did so fantastically was their clear, concise format. Every single episode is pretty much the same. It's just telling a different piece of history. They're only about 15 minutes long, and it's kind of that sweet spot for kids' attention spans or running the kids from point A to point B. I think the average American's car ride is about 15, 20 minutes right now. And that 15-minute mark for an episode, perfect timing. Everyone gets settled. You hit play on the episode. By the time you're dropping everyone off or picking them up, like, it's done and over with. You're moving on to the next thing. It was also really great as an adult listening to this way after the pandemic. I was out on a walk in my neighborhood. I hit play on the first one, started walking. By the time I got home, I didn't even realize I had walked 2 miles because I was just going one episode right after the next. It felt like I was binge watching something, but I wasn't. I was out on a walk listening to it, and it was just fantastic. I think that 15-minute short storytelling, perfect for the attention span these days. The last thing I want to touch on that this show just did so extremely well was the little pop quiz element at the end of every episode. It's not just a clever way to reinforce learning, it's also a call to action for your listeners to actively participate in the show. How many times have you turned something on and then had to tap that 15-second rewind button because you're like, oh, wait, what'd they say? I wasn't actually listening. I just kind of had it on the background, but then they start talking about something where you're like, oh, probably should have paid attention. Like this show, having that pop quiz at the end, you pay attention because you want to get all 5 questions right. There's no prize. There's no reward for knowing the answers to the questions at the end of the show, but it gives you a reason to really pay attention to what the host is saying. And you know that pop quiz is coming because they announce it right away when the show starts. It says, hey, here's the show, here's what it's all about. And remember, there's a pop quiz at the end, so be paying attention. I think that that is genius, especially if you're doing something that's targeted at actually like learning history, learning a certain thing. You're an educator of some sort. You're talking to little kids. It keeps them focused on a task. They know what's coming up, and then they get to feel good at the end if they know the answers to the questions. I love the pop quiz element. So now let's get into what could be improved about the show Homeschooled History. No show is perfect. Even my show isn't perfect. I'm well aware of that. But I think there's a couple of areas that really could be improved about the show to make it even stronger. And I know we are talking about a show that is not made anymore, but these lessons still apply. So the first thing I want to touch on is the fact that this show isn't around. It was a limited run. Obviously, that isn't a flaw of the content itself. The beautiful thing about doing something like this for a show focused around history is that there's always going to be history. History keeps getting made every single day, so there's always something to talk about in the past, but it was something that was tied to a specific moment. People were homeschooling and it needed entertainment for their kids, needed entertainment for themselves, and the show beautifully served its purpose, even though it did have a very limited run. So with that in mind, think about your own show and its staying power. If you're designing a show, think about how your format could evolve beyond a temporary thing, especially if you're doing something that's very like right here, right now. This is what's happening in the modern moment. Like, how can you take that show and what does the staying power look like 6 months from now, a year from now, heck, 5 years from now when someone random discovers it on TikTok? Another thing that I think could be improved on for this show is the fact that it was catered so heavily to kids. I would love to see even like a young adult or an adult version of it. I love the lightheartedness. It was so easy to listen to. You could throw it on in any place and people would want to engage and listen to it. It appealed to every single age, but I would love to see like a more in-depth history lesson for adults because I'm a history nerd. I like learning about this stuff, especially the Pocahontas episode. I've been through the American school system. I know we were not that nice to those historical figures. So I think something like that where there's more of an in-depth, real life, not so sugar-coated version of history would be really fun and engaging to listen to, and that would lend itself to longer than 15-minute episodes. You could have an extended episode on certain topics that warranted it. So I think that would be a really cool way for the show if they ever wanted to come back. I would love to see them come back, but something they could do is come back, keep doing the shows catered for kids, and then maybe even once a month we're deep diving this topic. This is more adult content. It's young adult content. You've been warned. But I would still want that pop quiz at the end of it because that was my favorite part. And then something else I want to touch on with what the show could improve on is more discoverability after the fact. The show ended in 2021. It was over 5 years ago, but it's still relevant today, which I think is so awesome. I found it in August of 2025, but I wish the BBC would do more with their evergreen content to even push it on their channels. Because like I said, I found it from some random person on my For You page on TikTok. So I think it'd be really cool if the BBC would bring it back, promote that evergreen content, because I mean, it's history, so it doesn't necessarily change a whole lot. So they could keep pushing the show and get more people listening to a show that they're not necessarily making more episodes of, but they can keep sharing it and getting that SEO and generating those views and downloads. So what can you take away from the show and apply to your own show? Knowing your audience, I think, is a huge lesson from Homeschool History. If you're making a business podcast, maybe your audience is busy professionals, so you keep your episodes short and sweet so they can consume it when they're going from one meeting to the next. Maybe you are making a show for kids and you're like, yeah, you're right, that attention span thing. I need to shorten up what I'm talking about, get to the point faster. Knowing your audience and who your show is for can help you cater to them better, which in turn makes them more loyal to your brand and what you're doing. doing. Another thing I think we can all take away with is playing with sound. You don't need a giant production team to make your show more engaging. Even adding like a cheering noise when you announce a special guest, or an applause at the end of it, or little transition noises when you're going between topics can make a huge difference and really level up the sound of your audio and of your video. So I think that is something we can all really take away from this show. And then end with an action. I think I've said it a billion times in this podcast. I love the fact that there was a pop quiz at the end of this show. Think about how you can do something that's engaging in your own way as well. It doesn't have to be a pop quiz. It can be a pop quiz. I'm down for a pop quiz. But think about what you can do to really get that call to action with your guests, get them engaging, that call to action with your listeners, keep them engaged, keep them thinking, have them retain the information that you shared. I think the pop quiz is a great structure. Everyone should have a pop quiz. That's the new rule. And I was trying to keep it to 3, but I'm going to add a 4th one here as well. I want you to think about the longevity of your podcast. Are you doing something that is tied to a trend right now, or something that's airing on TV or modern news? What could you do to plan that content more for long-term discoverability? Is there some way you could tie a lifelong lesson in there? Is there some sort of download you can create on your website that keeps people coming back even though it was more of a timely episode? Think about that just in the long term, because like I said, I discovered this show 4 years after they stopped making it, and I still really like it because of how well they made this evergreen content. So just something to keep in the back of your mind as you're going about formatting and making your podcast. So that's my breakdown of Homeschool history. Overall, I think it is a fantastic show and a great example of how to make educational content fun and accessible. It really shows the power of targeting an audience and using that sound design effectively to keep them captivated and entertained, especially in a time when the world was very uncertain. If you're a podcaster looking for inspiration, go give Homeschool History a listen. It's a masterclass in short form content. And if you're looking for help making your own show more engaging, that's exactly what I do. I am a consultant. I am a podcast producer. I'm here to answer questions. So if you're looking for help in anything that involves podcasting, go ahead and check out abbygravesproductions.com. I got links in the show notes below, and I'd love to help you out. I'll catch you back here in a couple weeks with another episode of Abby the Podcast Lady. Thank you so much for listening.